shorten up the passage from Romans. Instead of 1 to 11, I'm going to read 1 to 5. I hope if I turn this on, I always forget to use that. Therefore, since we are justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have obtained access to this grace in which we stand. And we boast in our hope of sharing the glory of God. Not only that, we also boast in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, endurance produces character, character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint us, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. Well, I suspect that all of us here are familiar with what is supposed to be a Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. While there's no evidence of the Chinese origin of that particular curse, it expresses a very human experience. Most of us, most of the time, prefer a peaceful, routine life. Reasonably good health, a regular job that puts food on the table, reasonably well-behaved children, a decent house with a roof that doesn't leak, a few steady friends, quiet dinners at home. Well, you get the picture. The reason it's a curse, may you live in interesting times, it's because it implies disruption. It implies change. And as we know, not all change is good. We want our lives to be smooth and steady, but that, of course, is not the way they always are. Last week, I went to my usual trip to HEB, and driving into the parking lot, I experienced my usual irritation. One speed bump after another. I swear they must be every 20 feet on the way into HEB. And I know they're there for a good reason, but that doesn't stop me from being slightly irritated nonetheless. And I rather suspect, is anyone out there like me, if the parking lot's not busy, I drive around the speed bump, try to avoid the speed bump. And if the parking lot is a little bit busy and I can't really do that, I'll drive over to the end of the speed bump and only one tire goes up over the end of the speed bump. Yeah, I see some thumbs up on that. And if I can't do that and there's a gap in the middle of the speed bump, I'll aim for the gap and one wheel goes up over the speed bump. It doesn't really help, but it makes me feel better. As I said, I know there's a good reason for speed bumps, but that doesn't mean I have to like them. And speed bumps have kind of become a metaphor for people's experience in life, which, as we all intimately know, is not always a smooth superhighway. I Googled speed bumps in life, and that's an interesting exercise. You can try that later when you get home. I found these little nuggets of wisdom about speed bumps. Here's one. Stuck in speed bump city, where the only thing that's pretty is the thought of getting out. And here's one. Never let someone with the significance of a speed bump become a roadblock in your life. And here's one. On the road of life, you can't get off the exit ramp without some bumps and roadblocks and a few detours. This last one's by Oprah Winfrey, and you're going to hear more about her story towards the end of this sermon. I was living in the fast lane, and then I married a speed bump. And here's another. Don't confuse speed bumps for stop signs. And then the last one, the speed bumps are there to make us better drivers. And that's true. The speed bumps are there to make us better drivers. Now, when I think about people in the Bible, almost all of them face significant speed bumps in their life. They're not stained glass saints that the light just shines through constantly. Most of them have had speed bumps in their lives, and we're going to try a little exercise right now. I'm going to ask you to name some major biblical characters. Now, this is not your opportunity to stump the pastor. You don't name some obscure Old Testament person that even I don't know. Let's stick to major characters in the Bible. Now, what are some of the major characters in the Bible? David, oh, there's a good one. And did he experience speed bumps? Adultery, had Uriah the Hittite killed on the battlefield so he could marry Bathsheba. His son with Bathsheba died. He had a lot of speed bumps. Had civil war with his own son. Who's another one? Herod. Oh my gosh, Herod was a walking speed bump. And at the end of his life, he was consumed with some kind of chronic illness that literally ate him alive practically at the end of his life. So yes, he was a walking speed bump for other people. Job, now he's the king of speed bumps. His whole life was a speed bump almost until the tail end of the story. Moses, oh, there's one. Moses who accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally, killed the Egyptian and had to flee his home, went off to become a shepherd. And then, of course, as we heard in the Exodus passage, he had to try to lead the Israelites to the promised land. 40 years in the desert, one speed bump after another. Jonah, oh, well, we know what happened to Jonah. He got swallowed by that whale. He also was kind of a cranky person and didn't really want to listen to God and go preach to the evil people in Nineveh because he had a thing against Ninevites, I guess. Eve, yeah, Eve had a few problems in the form of a snake and an apple, as the story goes, and then she gets tossed out of the garden, of course, and she has to experience the childbirth pains and all of that, according to the story, yes. Ruth, oh, there's one, Ruth, who was the widow at an early age, and she and her mother-in-law had to spend their life together and stayed together when she didn't really have to. But all the speed bumps they experienced as being a foreigner in a foreign land, her husband dying. Yeah, talk about speed bumps. Who else? Anybody else? Well, yeah, a little thing called the crucifixion there. Not to mention dealing with the disciples who weren't always the easiest to deal with, and dealing with the Roman Empire that put them on that cross. So yeah, all these biblical characters, they all experience major speed bumps in their life. And that's part of the story. It's an important part of the story of faith, because faith is pretty useless unless it can somehow help you deal with speed bumps. It makes me think of, from the Buddhist tradition, I don't know if you know the story of the 4 passing sights in Buddhism. Siddhartha Gautama is the prince in this kingdom. His father is the king. And the father had a prophecy that his son would become a great king as long as he didn't become an ascetic monk. And so the father sets out to insulate Siddhartha from all the vicissitudes of life. He keeps him in the palace, and all the wealth and power, he entertains him with dancing girls and feasts and entertainments of all kind, and keeps him in the palace. But eventually, Siddhartha goes out into the world, and the first passing sight, he comes upon an old, decrepit man in the last years of his life. He's never seen an old person before. His father kept old people away from the palace. He didn't know that people actually got old, and it disrupts his mind. He comes to the second passing sight, which is a sick person. He has never seen a sick person in his life. His father kept all the sick people away from him in the palace. And now he sees human beings are subject to becoming sick. And then he comes to the third passing sight, a dead body. He certainly has never seen a dead body. His father kept that away in the palace. And once again, his mind is disturbed by the reality of death. And then he comes to the fourth passing sight, which is an ascetic monk who is trying to figure out why there is human suffering in the world. So he became this ascetic monk, and Siddhartha decides he too will become an ascetic monk. And so he sets out from the palace, and he begins a multi-year journey of faith, trying one spiritual path after another, trying to figure out why there is human suffering. None of them work. And finally, he plants himself under the Bo tree. He says, I'm not leaving from this spot until I know. And he does eventually achieve enlightenment, and he becomes the Buddha. Now, it's not just individuals who experience speed bumps. So do communities and nations. I would put it to you that we're in the middle of a huge speed bump right now. The Old Testament is one long story of a speed bump after another for the Jewish people. It's famine that drove the ancestors of the Jewish people to go to Egypt, to pick up from their home and walk miles to Egypt to try to start a new life. And they have freedom and some prosperity for a while, until Pharaoh becomes very suspicious and fearful of them as foreigners. And so he enslaves them and makes their life difficult, and eventually Moses comes along to lead them to the promised land, which he starts to do, as we saw in the earlier reading today. He leads them out into the desert on that 40-year journey, and the first thing they do is they run out of water, and that's not a good thing in the desert. And they start complaining to Moses about dying in the desert. Why did he bring them out there? Moses himself does a little complaining of his own to God. Why did you stick me with these people out here in the middle of the desert without water? Well, you know how, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story goes when it comes to the Jewish people. We know that after 40 years of wandering, they finally enter the promised land, but they find out that it's occupied by the Canaanites and the Philistines. So one battle after another, they finally get a piece of the promised land. After many more battles and wars, they decide they want a king, and that doesn't work out so good with Saul. But then David and Solomon come along. They have great prosperity for about 100 years. But then the kingdom falls apart in a civil war. Two little tiny kingdoms against the major empires of the time. The Babylonians come along and burn Jerusalem to the ground in 587. They're hauled into captivity in Babylon again. They finally are released after about 50 years or so, go back to rebuild the city. The Assyrians come along and conquer them again. They finally manage to kick the Assyrians out, and they're free again for about 100 years until the Romans come and conquer them. One war, one battle, famine, floods, droughts, after another. Right down to the very present day, we're experiencing more wars in the Middle East with Israel and Lebanon and Gaza and all of that. One thing after another. And so the Jewish people are constantly asking themselves in the midst of all this, in the midst of the Holocaust, is the Lord among us or not? It sure doesn't look that way when you look at history. Is the Lord among us or not? And then we read in Paul's letter to the church in Rome, we boast in our sufferings. That seems a strange thing to say. But Paul is talking at least from his personal experience. I don't know if I would have the strength to say that, but Paul does. I boast in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance. Endurance produces character. Character produces hope. And hope does not disappoint us because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit. Paul is sharing his personal experience. We could have named him among the biblical characters who experienced speed bumps because you know his story. He goes around spreading the Christian faith and starting churches all across the Mediterranean world, and these churches are like churches today. They're not perfect. They got a few bad apples in them. And so they have problems, and they have issues, and they have complaints, and they have failures, and they complain against Paul about who he is and what he's doing. He gets imprisoned. He's stoned by local authorities, and eventually, of course, he's martyred. And Paul, dealing with all of that, also had to deal with a medical problem, a chronic medical problem that he described as a thorn in the flesh. He had that apparently for his whole life. We don't know what it was, but some kind of chronic medical problem that he dealt with. He was no stranger to speed bumps. Now I want to share with you perhaps a little extended biography. You may know some of this information already, but I was amazed to learn about the biography of Oprah Winfrey. What an incredible story. We all know what an amazing success she has had in life. I mean, she's a multi-millionaire, TV, movie personality. But she experienced major speed bumps in her life. Her story is incredible. She was born to a poor, single, teenage mother. She was shuttled back and forth between relatives until she was 14. She remembers being with her grandmother, and her grandmother asked her to go out to the well and bring back a bucket of water, and she stuck her fingers in the water for some reason, and her grandmother saw her do it and just beat the living tar out of her. So much so that she started to bleed from the welts that she got from her grandmother. And it happened to be Sundays, and she had her Sunday dress on to go to church. And she was bleeding, and she got some blood on that dress. Well, the grandmother beat her again for getting blood on the dress. Fortunately, the grandmother had her moments where she acted like a real grandmother should. She did teach Oprah how to read by the age of 3. And she recalls that she got positive strokes from the people in her church when she would go and recite Bible passages at the church, and she would get positive affirmation from the people in her church. And she said in later life, that helped her with her career decisions. Just as a child receiving positive strokes, imagine the impact. You had some children up here earlier, and the positive strokes they get from being here on Sunday morning. You don't know the impact that'll have. It could be life-changing. At the age of 6, she went to live with her mother in Milwaukee. The mother had to work incredibly long hours just to put food on the table, so she didn't spend much time with Oprah, which was not good as it turned out because Oprah's 19-year-old cousin raped her. Other relatives also continued to abuse her, including her mother's boyfriend also sexually abused her until she was 13 years old. And at 13, she decided she would run away from home to get away from all of that. She herself became pregnant at 14, and the baby died shortly after she gave birth. Oprah moved in with her father, and she recalls that my father turned my life around. He taught me that I was more than I was when I moved in with him, that I had yet more things to do and discover about who I was. His love of learning showed me the way. Oprah excelled at school. She received a full scholarship to Tennessee State University, and after graduating, of course, she went into broadcasting, where she made her mark and made her fortune, became the huge success she is today. She says, "My story helped define and shape me, as does everybody's story." And we had that wonderful song earlier that talked about sharing our stories with one another. She said that she was very grateful for the years that she spent in poverty because it made her success all the sweeter. She said, "I learned 4 things from my story, my life story. With all of its speed bump, there are 4 things that she said she learned, and I'm just going to go over them very quickly as I move towards the conclusion. The first, she said, is the importance of developing resilience. And as you heard, she had a lot of things she had to develop resilience for that she was dealing with. Psychotherapist Lynn Lyons says a child needs to have good self-esteem, a positive outlook, and encouraging adults to offer guidance. Oprah believes that for every one of us that succeeds, it's because there is someone there to show us the way out. For me, she says, it was teachers and school. Second, Oprah says, she values positive thinking. Positive thinking provides less stress, better coping skills, increased health. Oprah devoted, as you know, if you ever watched her television programs, she devoted many of those TV programs to positive thinking. And if you think back about her television show, what a contrast to the Jerry Springer show. Her show really did try to offer positive thinking to people. Oprah says that the greatest discovery of all time is that a person can change their future by changing their attitude. Good lesson. Third, Oprah highlights the importance of developing empathy. She says, I know what it feels like not to be wanted. You can use that as a stepping stone to build great empathy for other people. So anytime you experience speed bumps in life, it is an opportunity to develop empathy for other people and the speed bumps that they're facing. And finally, Oprah says she learned to take advantage of opportunities as they arose. Psychologists have concluded that often when people think of themselves as being lucky, that really they are just better at seizing opportunities as they come along. Oprah describes luck as preparation meeting opportunity. Preparation meeting opportunity. So my prayer for all of us is that as we experience life's speed bumps, that it will encourage us all to just slow down and gain what wisdom we can, because there is wisdom to be gained from it. If we do that, we might just experience that endurance produces character, character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint us.